In 1874, construction was completed on what was officially described as a large industrial building in the heart of St. Petersburg, Russia. The towering structure with its arched windows and intricate stonework was supposed to be just another expansion of the city's industrial infrastructure. Official records from the time credit the building's design to renowned architect Anatoly Karpov with a stated purpose of manufacturing mechanical parts for the expanding Russian rail system. However, as I examined a forgotten photograph from a local archive, something felt off. A small, seemingly inconsequential detail caught my eye. Beneath the massive stone arches, just visible in the photograph, was a set of brass pipes, almost an afterthought. These pipes, too large for industrial ventilation, seemed far more suited to a colossal organ. The placement, the material, the design, it didn't align with the industrial purpose. Perhaps this wasn't just a factory at all. Maybe it was something else entirely, something far older, connected to the mysterious systems attributed to what some researchers now call Tartarian architecture. The official narrative surrounding the St. Petersburg structure seemed straightforward enough when I first encountered it. City records dated to 1874 described a functional industrial facility commissioned to support the Russian Empire's expanding railway network. The architect of record, Anatoly Karpov, was credited with designing what the documents called a mechanized assembly hall for locomotive components. Everything appeared in order. The building existed, the paperwork existed, the purpose was stated clearly. Yet something in the early photographs refused to settle. I had begun this research expecting confirmation of mundane history, a simple verification of construction dates and architectural intent. Instead, I found myself staring at measurements that defied the stated purpose. The windows were too tall, their proportions closer to cathedral design than factory specification. The stonework displayed a level of carved detail that seemed extravagant for an industrial building meant to house machinery and workers. Most troubling were the internal dimensions. The main hall rose to nearly 40 meters, a height utterly unnecessary for manufacturing locomotive parts. A construction journal entry from March 1874, preserved in the city archive, noted the installation of acoustic channels of unusual proportion. The notation appeared only once, with no further explanation. Acoustic channels in a factory designed for metal fabrication? The contradiction was subtle but unmistakable. As I cross-referenced early maps of the region, maps that predated the Russian Empire's consolidation and still marked vast territories as Tartaria, I began to wonder whether this building had truly been constructed in 1874, or whether it had merely been repurposed, its original function quietly erased from the record. The deeper I examined the archival photographs, the more anomalies emerged. A series of construction images dated to 1874 showed workers installing what appeared to be standard industrial equipment, pulleys, conveyor mechanisms, steam-powered machinery. Yet in the background of one photograph, partially obscured by scaffolding, I noticed a set of vertical brass tubes rising through the floor of the main hall. These were not ventilation ducts, their diameter was too precise, their spacing too regular. They resembled nothing so much as the pipes of an enormous organ. I consulted engineering specifications from the period. Standard industrial ventilation in the 1870s relied on cast iron ducts with irregular diameters designed for function rather than precision. The brass tubes in the photograph displayed tolerances that should not have been achievable with period technology. Each pipe appeared identical in diameter to the next, a uniformity that suggested machine manufacturing capabilities decades beyond 1874. A maintenance log from 1889, discovered in the same archive, contained a peculiar entry. Removal of underground mechanisms of unknown purpose ordered, chambers below main hall to be sealed with concrete fill. The entry was initialed but unsigned, and no further documentation explained what these underground mechanisms had been or why their removal was deemed necessary. The language itself troubled me. Unknown purpose suggested that even 15 years after the building's supposed construction, its original systems remained mysterious to those tasked with maintaining it. This was not the language of workers describing equipment they had installed. It was the language of people confronting something they did not understand. As I expanded my research beyond St. Petersburg, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Buildings of similar design appeared across Europe, each officially dated to the mid to late 19th century, each attributed to different architects, yet each displaying the same inexplicable features. In Paris, a structure completed in 1867 contained identical brass piping systems concealed within its walls. In Berlin, a building from 1871 featured underground chambers whose measurements matched those described in the St. Petersburg maintenance logs almost exactly. The architectural signatures were unmistakable: oversized arched windows, domed ceilings of precise curvature, red brick construction with ornate stonework, and hidden infrastructure that served no documented purpose. These were motifs that researchers studying alternative historical frameworks have long associated with what they call Tartarian architecture, the remnants of a civilization systematically erased from official history. I examined early atlases from the 16th and 17th centuries, maps that depicted vast regions across Asia and Eastern Europe labeled simply as Tartaria. These territories, once acknowledged on every major cartographic document, vanished from maps. By the 19th century, replaced by the expanding borders of the Russian Empire. The timing was troubling. The buildings I was studying all dated to this period of cartographic erasure. A renovation record from the Berlin structure, dated 1903, noted the permanent sealing of acoustic resonance chambers with no explanation of what those chambers had been designed to resonate. The more I looked, the more the pattern repeated. Construction, concealment, silence. Returning to the St. Petersburg blueprints, I began analyzing the pipe installations with fresh eyes. The engineering drawings, preserved in remarkably good condition, showed a network of brass conduits running through the building's walls and floors in patterns that made no sense for industrial ventilation. The curves and angles were too precise, the joints too carefully designed. These were not utilitarian features, they were something else entirely. I consulted with an acoustical engineer who examined the blueprint specifications. His analysis was unsettling. The pipe diameters, their lengths, their positioning within the structure all corresponded to frequencies in the subsonic and infrasonic range. These aren't ventilation ducts, he told me. They're resonators designed to produce or amplify sound frequencies below the threshold of human hearing. The implications were staggering. Industrial buildings do not require subsonic resonators. Factories do not need infrasonic amplification systems. Beneath the stone floors of the main hall, the blueprints indicated a series of chambers whose walls were lined with what the original notation described as hydraulic pressure vessels. These vessels connected directly to the brass pipe network above. The system appeared designed to store and release pressurized air through the resonating pipes, generating sound waves of immense power. A fragment from an 1878 engineering assessment tucked into the archive folder noted, "Sound propagation capabilities exceed documented requirements. Purpose unclear." The assessment was never followed up. The chambers were sealed a decade later. Whatever this system had been designed to do, someone had decided it was better forgotten. The renovation records from the early 1900s told a story of systematic erasure. Between 1901 and 1912, the St. Petersburg structure underwent what official documents described as modernization. The language was bureaucratic, clinical, yet the specifics revealed something far more deliberate. In 1903, workers removed what the records called obsolete power systems from the lower levels. In 1907, the brass pipe network was decommissioned and filled. By 1912, the underground chambers had been completely sealed, their entrances bricked over and plastered to match the surrounding walls. I walked through the building myself, searching for traces of what had been removed. In one corridor, behind a modern heating duct, I found a sealed doorway. The brickwork was clearly different from the original construction, newer, rougher, hastily applied. A small metal plate beside the door read, "Storage, no entry," but the door had no handle, no hinges visible from the corridor side. It was not a storage room, it was a wall built to conceal what had once been an entrance. The word obsolete appeared repeatedly in the renovation documents, always without explanation. Obsolete compared to what? The technologies being removed, hydraulic pressure systems, acoustic resonators, underground chambers, were never replaced with equivalent modern systems. They were simply eliminated, their existence erased from the building's functional history. A construction foreman's personal note from 1907, preserved separately from official records, offered a rare glimpse of confusion. Ordered to fill the brass tubes with sand and seal them within the walls. Asked why, told it was not my concern. The foreman's frustration was evident. He was destroying infrastructure he did not understand, following orders that made no sense to him. The more I studied the acoustic systems, the more convinced I became that they represented technology far beyond the official capabilities of the 1870s. The pipe tolerances visible in the blueprints suggested manufacturing precision that would not become standard until the mid-20th century. The chamber designs indicated an understanding of acoustic physics that, according to mainstream historical accounts, simply did not exist at the time of construction. I traced similar systems across the continent. In Vienna, a building from 1869 contained identical resonating chambers. In Prague, a structure dated to 1873 featured the same brass pipe network, sealed and forgotten in the 1920s. Each building bore the architectural signatures that Tartarian researchers have documented extensively: the oversized windows, the precise dome curvatures, the red brick construction with ornate stone detailing. These were not coincidental similarities. They were the fingerprints of a unified design philosophy spanning thousands of miles. An engineering journal from 1881, published in Munich, contained a passing reference to acoustic transmission experiments conducted in converted Tartarian structures. The author did not elaborate on what Tartarian structures meant, treating the term as common knowledge among his readers. Yet by the 1900s, the word Tartarian had vanished from technical literature entirely. The structures remained, the systems remained, sealed, filled, forgotten. Only the name had been erased. A technical assessment from 1885 noted with evident puzzlement, the acoustic propagation efficiency of the installed system exceeds theoretical maximum for materials used. Origin of design unknown. The engineer who wrote those words was confronting something that contradicted his training. His response was to document the anomaly and move on. The question of origin remained unanswered. The global spread of these structures demanded explanation. How could buildings separated by thousands of kilometers, officially designed by different architects in different decades, share such precise architectural and engineering features? The mainstream historical narrative offered no satisfactory answer. International engineering standardization did not exist in the 1860s and 1870s. Communication between architectural firms across national boundaries was limited and slow. Yet the measurements I was comparing showed tolerances matching within centimeters across structures from St. Petersburg to Paris to Vienna. I examined the archival photographs more closely, looking for evidence of construction techniques. What I found troubled me. The stonework in the St. Petersburg building displayed machine-cut precision that should not have been possible with period equipment. The blocks were too uniform, their edges too clean. Similar precision appeared in photographs from Berlin, from Prague, from cities across the former Tartarian territories. The stones themselves seemed to predate the official construction dates. A geological survey from 1892, conducted as part of a planned renovation in Vienna, noted that the building's foundation stones showed weathering patterns inconsistent with stated construction date. The surveyor estimated the stones had been exposed to the elements for at least 2 centuries before being incorporated into the structure. Yet official records dated the building to 1869. His report was filed and apparently ignored. No follow-up investigation was conducted. The renovation proceeded as planned, sealing another set of underground chambers and filling another network of acoustic pipes. The pattern was becoming undeniable. These buildings were not being constructed in the 19th century. They were being discovered, repurposed, and systematically stripped of their original technologies. The hydraulic systems represented perhaps the most troubling anomaly. Beneath multiple structures across Europe, I found documentation of pressure chambers capable of generating forces far beyond anything industrial processes of the era required. The St. Petersburg chambers, according to the sealed blueprints, could sustain pressures of over 200 atmospheres, levels typically associated with modern industrial equipment, not 19th century construction. I consulted historical records of hydraulic technology. In the 1870s, standard pressure systems operated at 20 to 30 atmospheres. The technology for safely containing 200 atmospheres did not officially exist until decades later. Yet here were blueprints dated 1874 showing chambers designed for exactly those specifications. The contradiction was impossible to reconcile with the mainstream timeline. A private letter from an engineer involved in the 1903 St. Petersburg renovation offered a rare personal account. "We have been ordered to fill the pressure chambers with concrete," he wrote to a colleague. "The foreman says they are too dangerous to leave empty, but when I asked what they were designed for, he had no answer. No one seems to know. The original plans show connections to the pipe systems above, but the purpose remains unclear. I have worked with hydraulic systems for 20 years, and I have never seen anything like this. The design suggests an application we do not yet understand." The letter was never published. It survived only because the recipient kept his correspondence. The engineer's puzzlement echoed across a century, asking questions that official history had chosen not to answer. After months of research, the accumulated evidence pointed toward a conclusion that mainstream history refuses to acknowledge. The buildings I had been studying were not isolated anomalies. They were nodes in a vast network, spanning continents, sharing identical design principles and engineering specifications. The acoustic pipe systems, the pressure chambers, the underground infrastructure, all appeared to be components of a unified technological system whose purpose had been systematically obscured. I compiled measurements from 17 structures across Europe. The results were unsettling. Dome curvatures matched within fractions of a degree. Window proportions followed identical mathematical ratios. Underground chamber dimensions repeated with machine-like consistency. This was not the signature of independent architects working in different countries across different decades. This was the signature of a single engineering tradition, preserved and replicated across vast distances. Tartarian researchers have documented these patterns extensively, arguing that they represent the remnants of a civilization whose technologies were inherited, not invented, by the 19th century. The evidence I was examining supported this interpretation with troubling consistency. A cartographic study from 1856, published in London, noted with evident confusion that structures of uniform design appeared across regions recently incorporated into the Russian Empire from Tartary. The author did not elaborate on what this uniformity implied. The study was not reprinted after its initial publication, yet the observation remained valid. Identical buildings appearing simultaneously across territories that had only recently been erased from maps as Tartaria. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. The renovation records across multiple structures revealed a coordinated pattern of technological removal. Between 1890 and 1920, buildings in St. Petersburg, Berlin, Vienna, Prague, and Paris all underwent similar modifications. Underground chambers were sealed, acoustic pipe networks were filled with sand or concrete, hydraulic systems were disconnected and removed. The official justifications varied: modernization, safety concerns, structural improvements. But the results were identical: the elimination of technologies that served no recognized purpose. I examined the timing of these renovations. They clustered around the turn of the century, a period of rapid industrialization and technological change. The official narrative suggests that older systems were simply being replaced with newer, more efficient technologies. Yet the acoustic resonators were never replaced with alternative sound systems. The pressure chambers were never converted to other uses. They were simply eliminated, their existence sealed beneath brick and concrete. A memorandum from the Berlin Municipal Archives dated 1911 authorized the permanent decommissioning of subsurface infrastructure of uncertain origin. The phrase "uncertain origin" appeared repeatedly in documents from this period, an admission that even contemporary authorities did not fully understand what they were destroying. A building inspector's report from Prague, written in 1915, noted, "The sealed chambers contain equipment for which no maintenance records exist. Original installation predates available documentation." The inspector recommended leaving the chambers sealed rather than investigating further. His recommendation was followed. The chambers remain sealed to this day. Whatever knowledge they contained was deliberately buried, its recovery made impossible by the very authorities charged with preserving historical structures. The more I studied the physical evidence, the more the official historical narrative fell apart. The precision of the stonework, the tolerances of the brass pipe systems, the specifications of the pressure chambers, none of these could be adequately explained by documented 19th century technology. The buildings existed, the systems existed, but the official explanation for their existence was fundamentally inadequate. I returned to the archival photographs, examining them with new understanding. The construction images from St. Petersburg, supposedly showing workers building the structure in 1874, revealed something unexpected on closer inspection. The building's exterior walls, visible in the background, showed weathering patterns and surface wear inconsistent with new construction. The construction photographs appeared to document not the building's creation, but its renovation, workers adapting an existing structure to new purposes. The implications were profound. If these buildings were not constructed in the 19th century, but merely modified, then their true origins lay elsewhere, in a civilization capable of engineering precision that official history claims did not exist. The Tartarian framework, dismissed by mainstream historians as conspiracy theory, offered the only coherent explanation for the evidence I had accumulated. The architectural signatures, the engineering specifications, the global distribution of identical features all pointed toward a technological inheritance from a civilization systematically erased from historical record. A survey note from 1887 buried in the Vienna archives captured the confusion of contemporaries. Building fabric appears substantially older than documented. Stone analysis suggests construction methodology unknown in current practice. The surveyor asked the right question. Official history provided no answer. After examining documents from dozens of archives, comparing photographs from multiple decades, and analyzing engineering specifications that should not have been possible for their stated era, I found myself confronting an uncomfortable conclusion. The structures I had studied were not Victorian industrial buildings. They were not products of 19th century engineering. They were remnants of something older, more sophisticated, and deliberately forgotten. The acoustic systems embedded in their walls represented technology whose purpose remains unclear, but whose precision exceeded anything documented in the official historical record. The pressure chambers beneath their floors suggested engineering capabilities that contradicted mainstream technological timelines. The global distribution of identical architectural features implied a coordination that should have been impossible before the age of international communication. Tartarian researchers have argued for years that these anomalies represent the inheritance of a lost civilization, a civilization whose existence has been systematically erased from historical consciousness. The evidence I accumulated cannot definitively prove this hypothesis, but it can demonstrate that the official explanation is inadequate. These buildings exist, their technologies existed, their precise global architectural signatures existed, and someone in the early 20th century made a deliberate decision to seal their secrets beneath brick and concrete, to fill their acoustic pipes with sand, to bury their pressure chambers and pretend they had never been there at all. I returned one final time to the St. Petersburg archive, to the photograph that had started this investigation. The brass pipes beneath the stone arches were still visible in that image, their purpose still unexplained by any official record. They had been filled with sand over a century ago, sealed within walls, forgotten by all but the most persistent researchers. Yet they remained, physical evidence of something the official narrative could not accommodate. The sealed chamber I had found during my visit to the building remained closed. No one I spoke with knew what lay behind that bricked-over doorway, what technologies had been buried there, what knowledge had been deliberately interred. The renovation records spoke of decommissioning and sealing, but never of understanding. The authorities of 1903 did not comprehend what they were destroying. They simply followed orders, filling chambers and sealing doors, erasing evidence of something they could not explain. Across Europe, identical chambers remain sealed, identical pipe systems remain filled, identical architectural signatures mark buildings whose official histories cannot account for their impossible precision. The Tartarian hypothesis persists because the evidence persists, quietly, stubbornly, in archived photographs and forgotten blueprints and sealed subterranean chambers. I cannot prove that these structures belong to a lost civilization, but I can say with certainty that they did not belong to the civilization that claimed to have built them. Something else created these systems. Someone else designed this technology. And a century ago, someone decided that humanity was better off not knowing what that technology could do. The pipes remain silent. The chambers remain sealed. The questions remain unanswered.